Hello, everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States and the author of this great book, which is being updated, America 2040, Still a Superpower, ? And he's got a new updated version coming out. Of course, I did order it, and they gave me the old version. So I'm still working on getting the new version. And today we're going to be talking about COVID-19 and its effect on the economy, the interest on the debt being the largest budget item. And of course, we have our international and national group of experts who are going to be joining us. First of all, we're going to welcome back I have a way to do a round of applause on this thing, but I'm just not going to do it. We're going to welcome back Shaquille Latber from the great country of Australia, where I was very interested in your opinion on high speed crashes in Australia, because we know these people go pretty fast in that state. There's nothing stopping you. There's nothing there. You just go zoom, but I don't know what you guys do for speed limits over in the great country of Australia. But we also have more on our panel. We have Rick Rosner, who is in the High IQ Society. I saw him in the Mega Society. You have to do 1 out of a million on IQ test. I haven't got there yet. I'm still working on it.
It means I'm an idiot because I waste time taking IQ tests.
Well, I know that. We do appreciate that, but you do have to beat all your peers who are other idiots who keep taking those tests over and over again. Reminds me of my trivia.
King of the idiots, basically.
Pardon?
King of the idiots.
Chess players are idiots too, so I understand the idiot. They keep playing chess. Think I keep playing it. We have a non-idiot, but he collected a lot of degrees. Also a professor, Dr. Dan Worthington, is going to be joining us out of Utah. And when we move over to Canada, we have Sasha Starr, who is very shy, as we well know, but every now and then he'll express his opinions. And then the former Comptroller General of the United States of America, we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker from Washington, D.C., to discuss in your book. Okay, I ordered your new book, and Amazon sent me your old book, so I have 2 of your books.
Oh, man, I'll tell you, what I will do is I will send you chapter 22, which is the update.
Can you send it to us down here in Australia too? Because if he can't get the book,
yeah.
They read English in Australia.
Just make sure that I have your email. I'm not sure that I do, but
I can forward it. I have all their emails.
Friends that have already bought the other book, I'll send you the update. Obviously, other people, and the only thing the update doesn't have is it doesn't have the graphics. There are graphics actually in the book. For the update chapter, but you can get all the wording, and that's what
I still want an autographed copy when I take out for lunch when I get to Virginia, Dave. So
I'll look forward to it.
Yeah, and the thing is, somewhere I want to interrupt the show, not today, but later on, to go over the budget, because that 2025 budget, I don't know if you've seen that, that puts us in the hole further and going further into the abyss of collapse. I mean, I looked at it, I'm going like,
Well, the 3 bottom line points about it, it's a big government budget, it's more spending, higher taxes, and nothing to basically deal with our structural imbalance. So it's unacceptable, and it's dead on.
Yeah, that was my basic opinion reading through it. Yeah, and like I said, I don't think the American public gets even a glimpse of the budget. It goes around the elite. But the hoi polloi, they never get the budget. I don't even look at it until we start doing the show.
To be fair, though, across most countries, most people, most families are struggling to balance their own household budget. So the idea that they can understand something as complex as a national budget or even a state budget or their local government budget, obviously people are going to struggle with that. But I think one of the questions I'll have, and Dave, if you want to perhaps respond to this, I think that economists for decades from now are going to examine this period of time and find out whether it was a good idea or a bad idea to increase deficit spending in the US. The US appears at the moment to have had a lower rate of inflation recently compared to Europe, but the US also had an increase in their deficit. And I think when it comes to economic theory, for those of us that have studied things like Keynesian and new Keynesian theories, the idea there is that you use economic levers to really settle the markets down, to try to keep them relatively stable. I'm not actually sure that that's necessarily that good an idea. Is it the case that during COVID we should have seen the stock market actually crash and stay deflated? That we should have seen a lessening in the prices of assets such as real estate, etc.? Or is it a good idea for us to intervene into those markets to artificially keep them higher at the cost of increased costs of living and potentially a bigger problem later on down the track? I don't think you know that answer now. I think that's something that we have to see how it plays out, and then people can study that in a generation from now.
And is our topic today COVID-19?
Yeah, it's COVID-19. Yeah, in other words, the thing is.
No, I was talking about the budget. Oh no, I was
well, that's okay.
We'll talk about the budget later, but the thing is, our topic today is COVID-19.
We've had an increase in the deficit, and we also now have, well, you guys have in the US, but most other countries are facing the same issues. What they're going to do for their budgets moving forward, where are they going to spend their money, how are they going to bring down costs of living, etc. And I think your opening comments were that this budget is very bloated, it's big government spending, and it's higher taxes. So that's what I was responding to.
Right, and nothing to deal with the structural imbalance. You're correct. Yeah. Okay. And so let me just make a few opening comments about COVID-19, and then let's get a dialogue going. First, we still don't know with any degree of certainty the origin of COVID-19. Many people believe that it started in a lab in Wuhan, which happens to be a lab that conducts that type of research for the People's Republic of China. There was also a wet market that was there. Our intelligence agencies are split. The FBI believes with moderate confidence that it came from the lab. The CIA is still yet to say anything, although the CIA, quite frankly, hasn't been on top of things for a lot of things lately, including Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Israel. The WHO, the World Health Organization, which is affiliated with the United Nations, has not been helpful in trying to get to the bottom of this. During the Trump administration, he initiated something called Operation Warp Speed, which in record time resulted in the creation of 3 new vaccines without going through the normal FDA process. RNA vaccines, which was a new type of vaccine. Those vaccines were ultimately approved by the FDA during the Biden administration. There have been some people that have had adverse reactions to these vaccines. Personally, my wife and I have had 3 of them. We've had COVID twice. It was nothing worse for us than a moderate cold. I think when you look at what ended up happening, a lot of states overreacted and shut down businesses, had shelters in place. Shut down the schools, if you will. And I think hindsight has shown that was a mistake. There are many other countries that didn't do that, that fared better than we did. President Biden issued an executive order that mandated that all government employees and contractors, including the military, had to mandatory take the vaccines. Our courts later said that he exceeded his authority under the Constitution with regard to government contractors. That's not the first time he's exceeded his authority. Student loans and certain other areas were another example of where he exceeded his authority and was struck back by the court. The military lost 8,000 people as a result of this that were conscientious objectors, for religious or other reasons. Later, in about a little over a year ago, the Congress ended up passing a law that rescinded that. I think if you look at in hindsight, you'll see that there was an adverse economic impact. There was an adverse education impact, especially for K through 12 students that put them behind. We're already not top 25 in the world in K through 12 education based upon outcomes, and this is further exacerbated. We spend about $6 trillion in additional spending geared towards COVID. Based on everything that I think at least $1 trillion of that was wasted. At least $1 trillion of it was wasted due to inadequate controls and other type of activities. We had about a 1% death rate. We've lost about 1.2, I think about 1.2 million people allegedly from COVID, which is about 1% of the people that got COVID. The problem is, I think that stat is not reliable because a lot of people never report whether they get COVID or not. In addition, our government ended up giving bonuses of $15,000 to $25,000 to hospitals who reported the death as COVID, even though they may not have died of COVID. In other words, they could have had COVID, but they didn't die from COVID. But they got an extra $15,000 to $25,000 if the person died and they reported that they had COVID, which is obviously a very perverse incentive. The bottom line is I think there are a lot of lessons learned from COVID. I compare it to what happened for the Spanish flu, 100 plus years ago. We didn't shut down the economy. We didn't shut down schools. We didn't spend, the equivalent of $6 trillion to try to prop things up. And quite frankly, we had a lower death rate. And we had less disruption. And this is just another example, I think, of where, government has, assumed so much more additional responsibility over the years. And their answer is, let's take control and let's throw money at it and just see how it comes out. So those are a few preliminary thoughts. I'd be interested in others. I see somebody put something up about the book, the proper price for the paperback book, just so you know, is $18.99. So they're obviously comparing it to the old book, which is apples and oranges. So FYI. Okay.
So I'm more of a COVID alarmist than you are.
Okay.
And yeah, I compare it to the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu, most of the world got it.
Yep.
And it was bad for your brain. And interestingly, within 10 years of the Spanish flu, we had the rise of fascism. And within 20 years, we had a depression, and then we had the whole world caught on fire, World War II. And I'm wondering if the world went crazy back then because the Spanish flu ate people's brains. We know that a case of COVID bad enough to put you in the hospital causes 20 years of aging to your brain. And, the average American has caught COVID 3 times, I think. And, I'm wondering what happens to us if COVID has made us dumber. I think it's made us worse drivers. And, this is a time when we're getting bombarded with propaganda from all sides. And if we're too dumb to figure out what's BS and what isn't, then, that's not great.
So I have the same, because I've had COVID twice now. And I'm 40, so I have the same mental acuity as Biden. Is that the theory then?
No, you didn't get hospital. You didn't go into the hospital.
You didn't get hospitalized.
Pretty much.
And I think the other issue that we need to keep in mind is the government didn't really take a targeted approach. It was kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. They assumed that if you were over a certain age that you, by definition, were high risk. But they went well beyond that to be able to mandate it to people of all ages. If they had taken a more targeted approach, the real bottom line is, do you have underlying health risk? If you have underlying health risk, no matter what your age is, it was a higher risk factor. Seniors tend to have more underlying health risk, but not all seniors have underlying health risk.
But to come back to the economic perspective of this, because we can debate and we will debate for decades what we should have done in lockdowns, not lockdowns, and all the rest of it. But to come back to the economics of it, I think that question that I sort of posed at the beginning is we are now having to deal with the aftermath of what all of our countries have done. The US has run a bigger deficit, but they've had lower inflation at the end of that period. Is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? Is the US too bloated because it's got too much debt compared to perhaps some of their counterparts? Is there, some tailwinds that are heading towards the US? What's your opinion of that?
Well, my opinion is that our politicians, who may have been, their brains may have been affected by COVID-19, but they were already challenged beforehand. Okay, that government's grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, and that COVID-19, frankly, is just an example of that. All right, it was a public health challenge. You could call it an emergency, whatever, but forget about COVID-19 for a second. Look at what the structural budget is. Okay, I mean, it's one thing when you have a financial crisis, 2007, 2008. It's one thing when you have a public health crisis, which related to COVID-19. But COVID-19's over as far as an official public health crisis, if you will, and yet, we are projected to have 1.7 plus and growing deficits, even though it's over, and that and so we've lost control, we've lost our senses, and I think it's important that we kind of get back to some of the fundamentals under which the country was founded, which includes, among other things, limited but effective government. We don't have limited government, and we don't have effective government either. So we're 0 for 2 on that. Just a few thoughts. Let's keep going.
Question for
Good.
you. So you've mentioned what needs to be done, and I don't know what the probability that we get back on an even keel economically is. Can you talk about what growth can do to paper over sloppy and bad economic policies?
Yeah, there's really several different elements that we need to look at going forward. One of which is, how do we increase economic growth? Because my personal view is the right metric from a fiscal standpoint are 3 things. Okay. Number 1, debt to GDP. How much debt do you have as a percentage of the economy? So if you can grow the denominator faster than the numerator, you're making progress, even if the numerator is going up. All right. Secondly, mandatory spending, which you've written a blank check for, as a percentage of the budget. In the U.S., for direct spending, it's over 70% and growing. And if you count the $1.7 trillion in tax preferences, which is really backdoor spending, the Congress only controls about 15% of annual total expenditures, which is obviously insane. I mean, that's not a budget when you only control about 15% of the expenditures. And the third thing is interest as a percentage of the budget. And interest now has passed national defense. It's our fastest growing expense. And what do we get for interest? Nothing. So yes, we need to adopt pro-growth policy. That has to do with, much more aggressively asking the question, what should the federal government do? How should it do it? How should it measure success? We need to devolve more back to the states. The government needs to recognize that it's not the engine of growth and innovation in the economy. The private sector is, and deal with things there. We need to, restructure our social insurance programs to make them solvent, sustainable, secure, but really be focusing on people who are truly in need rather than subsidizing upper middle class, people for a variety of things. We're not going to grow our way out of this problem. The hole's too deep. They waited too long. We can do things.
So how do we solve it then?
Two things.
Yeah.
Somebody
asked me that question the other day, and I wasn't prepared to answer. They go, "Couldn't we just, what is the basic advice you have?" Just,
Well, I'll give you 3 things. I'll give you 3 things that I think we need to do. Okay. There are bipartisan pieces of legislation in the Congress right now that they call it different words, but a fiscal sustainability commission, a statutory commission, which means that the Congress and the president would have to buy in up front, comprised of bipartisan and bicameral members of Congress, 4 outside experts who would engage the American people with the facts, the truth, the tough choices, solicit input. Everything's on the table, but not everything is equal. Package of recommendations that if a majority of the voting members vote for a package, it's a guaranteed up or down vote. That learns a lot of the lessons from Simpson Bowles. The American people are ahead of the politicians. They get it. And I think that is a mechanism that can help us to be able to make a lot of the tough choices with regard to social insurance programs, with regard to revenues, and with regard to reprioritizing, reducing projected discretionary spending. We got to do all that. Second thing, we've got to have a constitutional amendment. We don't have any constitutional constraint on our finances. And as a result of that, we've tried statutory approaches, which, the debt ceiling, bad joke. Other approaches that we've used over the years with regard to constrained spending haven't stood the test of time. The only thing that can control and bind current and future Congresses is the constitutional amendment. We need to learn from Switzerland, the Swiss debt brake, which controls the growth of government and also debt to GDP. That's a good model. There are other ones that we can look at. And the third thing that we have to do is that we need to have some of you may remember back during the Reagan administration, that was my first presidential appointment. They had something called the Grace Commission. Now, that was something that it was named after William R. Grace. I mean, the president established that. The Congress didn't buy in. There was no statutory authority for it. What we need is a statutory mechanism that will take a look at what the government's doing, how is it doing it, who's doing it, how do we measure success, and how can we end up, consolidating, evolving, and changing a lot of things that the federal government is doing that, quite frankly, just don't work.
Hey, David, just really quickly, I had a quick question for you. That in the state of North
Thank you,
Carolina,
David. That was a
where
great
I'm
answer.
at and everything, and where Steve's at is as well, there has been a big effort toward legalized betting as a way to get money and revenue. So I know that here in North Carolina, the lottery is supposed to go toward education and education reform. And we just recently, I think as of about a week ago, maybe a week and a half ago, got sports betting as a significant revenue enhancer. And I just wanted your take on that, because that is something that both Democrats and Republicans have been promoting, this notion of the lottery being a way to generate revenue. And I just wondered your take on that. And is that a legitimate way to raise money? Because it's something that, like I said, both Democratic and Republican governors have been in support of.
Well, first, we got to recognize that money is fungible. So people say that they'll use it for a certain purpose, but, whether in fact they do or not. In other words, is there a maintenance of effort requirement and things of that nature? We heard that with regard to the money associated with Iran, that they weren't going to be able to use it for certain purposes, but that's a bunch of bunk, because all you got to do, if you have more money, that money for something that is legal, and then you can use the other money for things that are illegal, right? So, I mean, that's the first thing. Second thing, states clearly have used the lottery a lot to raise additional revenue. And some people have said, including my wife, quite frankly, why doesn't the federal government have a national lottery? Now, I think the states probably wouldn't like that, because that would cut into their deal. And maybe we end up generating some additional revenue that way. But look, let's not kid ourselves. Our hole is so deep, that's not going to solve our problem. The other thing is, who plays the lottery?
Right.
Yeah, in practical terms, it's a tax on poor people.
Yeah,
and
that's
people,
right. That's right. If you look at
and people who can't do
people.
math. If you look on the back of the card and you look at your odds, it's like, no, don't play the lottery.
But just really
So would you support then the legalization of sports betting like most other Western countries?
Like you said, we got sports betting here in North Carolina now.
it is legal.
Well, now, but we haven't had it, and it's all based on certain sports. It's not all of them. It's they haven't approved gambling for everything in North Carolina. It's probably who paid the most. But and I don't know how they made the choices of who gets to do it. But heck, we couldn't even bet on the horse races last year in North Carolina without providing our driver's license, even if we were in Kentucky. So,
by the way, I just learned that the same thing happened today, because I tried to get on, because of the tournament, I tried to get on one of the ones that I heard about, and they wanted my driver's license and a bunch of other stuff that I have not given them as of yet. Doesn't mean I won't do it and won't do that, but it was one of the betting sites that wanted proof of identity is what they called it and everything. But David, my question to you,
whether or not you're old enough. A lot of that has to do with whether you're old enough. And by the way, you can bet on the ultimate horse race, which is called the presidential race.
Right. That is still.
Yeah, but you don't need a voter ID for that.
Your sports betting and gambling infrastructure, shall we say, in the United States it lags behind everybody else's. And I'm kind of surprised. I think most Westerners that go to America are kind of surprised by that, because you're supposed to be like all full of freedom and liberty and stuff. But in any case, I don't think you're going to be able to gamble your way in tax gambling in order to gamble your way out of the economic issues that face your country. But a question about whether lifting regulations on people so that they are free to do what they want to do might help.
I think that's part of it.
I think that would probably help.
Yeah, that's part of it. No question. Deregulation. Absolutely.
Hey, just really quickly, if I can ask just one quick follow-up question. What is your notion? Because the other thing that North Carolina used to be very good on, and I know Jacoby is aware of this as well, is our film industry. But we, in our infinite wisdom, decided to get rid of a lot of the tax credits to the filmmakers, and therefore the industry isn't as strong as it used to be. Not saying that there isn't films and TVs that are produced here, but it's not as strong as it used to be, because it used to be the number 2 or number 3, depending on who you were listening to, or 3 or 4, depending on who you were listening to, behind California and Florida. And definitely, but now we're probably like 10th or something like that. But I just wanted your thoughts on tax credits as a way to raise money as well.
Well, all right, let's talk about that. I think there's 2 kinds of spending. Front door spending, where you're actually spending money for things, whether it's social insurance programs, whether it's defense, whether it's homeland security, whatever. Okay. Yeah. And then there's backdoor spending. Backdoor spending is done through the Internal Revenue Code or through the tax code at the state level, where you give deductions, exemptions, credits, including refundable credits and some exclusions from income tax, if you will. I consider that spending. I consider that foregone revenue, backdoor spending, and that's where I said at the beginning, over 70% of the direct spending is on autopilot. We've written a blank check, and then when you add the 1.7 trillion in federal tax expenditures, we're only controlling about 15% of total expenditures. Front door and back door. When you look at those, I think you have to think about, the economic and cultural implications of that, because in many cases we have people that want to provide incentives, but they don't do a thorough economic analysis of whether or not in the end it actually is a plus or not. A plus from the standpoint of a financial standpoint, and a plus from the standpoint of society. And I think that tax preferences need to be subject to periodic reexamination and reconsideration, just like direct spending programs, but they're not. And I also think that they need a lot more transparency with regard to the financial statements of the governments, because they don't get much transparency at all right now. There's a lot of focus on direct spending and related obligations, but there's very little with regard to tax expenditures. So, this is an area that needs additional scrutiny, and it needs reform as well. I think as part of comprehensive tax reform, we ought to be getting rid of a lot of tax preferences so that we can keep rates as low as possible, so that we can enforce the law, because it's gotten so darn complicated. Even people who try in good faith to comply with it may not be able to do it.
I think there are a lot of positive knock-on effects to TV and movie production tax credits. I'm from Albuquerque, which I consider a wretched town in a largely wretched state. But New Mexico has generous tax credits. They had Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, just a bunch of movies. And now people, I think the country has a pretty positive image of except for the Alec Baldwin shooting from a crappy production, but a positive image of New Mexico, which helps with tourism. It maybe even helps with the optimism level in the state for not giving that much away, because how much can you give away to movies and TV shows?
I'm just saying you got to do economic analysis, and I'm just saying that we need to have a lot more transparency with regard to tax preferences at all levels of all types. But yeah, it can end up having a positive economic effect, it can have a positive effect on image.
David, when I was reading through the 25 economic budget that was submitted, it shows our debt rising to $50 trillion. This is in the budget. In other words, I don't know if that's a good thing. And the debt to GDP ratio, 116%, highest ever. The deficit to be 1.7 trillion. In other words, all I saw was bad news with worse news with even worse news. I did not see any constraints on spending. I didn't see any positive thing in the budget that would actually help America to be balanced again. I just saw out of control, reckless spending once again in areas that I don't even think the government should be in. I don't know. Have you gone through the 2025?
I've started going through it, and I've started going through it. Let me just reinforce something I've said before. The last president of the United States who was serious about doing something about putting our finances in order was Bill Clinton. In the last 24 years, we've had 12 years with Republican presidents, 12 years with Democratic presidents. None of them have been serious about this issue. And if you look at the two major candidates for president in 2024, the current president, Joe Biden, and the immediate former president, Donald Trump, they're not showing any evidence that they're going to be serious about it. In fact, both of them have said, as an example, they're not going to touch Social Security. Well, guess what that means? That means de facto they support 20% plus across the board in Social Security benefits in less than 10 years. Because if you do nothing, that's what you get. And by the way, you also get 10 to 15% cut in Medicare hospital insurance payments in less time than that if you do nothing for that program. So we have too many, what I've referred to, and this is a word I came up with, we ought to get it in the dictionary, laggards rather than leaders in government.
And by the way, the deficit that you're talking about, that is 50 trillion in the hole, does not count Social Security and Medicare, both going broke within the next decade or so. And all this is bad news, but the American public needs to know this, because there's nothing that I've seen any politician who goes and addresses and wrestles the animal. And if they don't do it, the animal's going to win.
Rick, let me say something real quick, and then you come in, okay? I use a lot of metrics, okay? The metric that gets covered by the press is the total debt subject to the debt ceiling, all right? And right now, the debt ceiling has been suspended until January of 2025, so that's a whole different story. But the total debt subject to the debt ceiling is about 34.5 trillion right now. Now, what is that? That's the debt, the debt that we owe to the public and the debt that we owe to the trust fund, Social Security, Medicare, et cetera, civilian and military pensions, retiree healthcare. But the bigger number is the total liabilities, the debt, that debt, and the unfunded obligations to Social Security and Medicare. For example, we have about $14 trillion in unfunded obligations for civilian and military pensions and retiree healthcare. 14 trillion. And it's about 3 times as much for the military as it is the civilian, even though we have a lot more civilians than we have the military. That tells you how generous those programs are. Okay. The bigger number is you got to add another 70 plus trillion for the unfunded obligations for Social Security and Medicare. And so therefore the total number is not 34.5, it's really about 125 plus trillion and growing faster than the economy.
The other candidates, because there are more than 2 candidates, aren't going to do anything about it either. RFK
get elected for one thing, so
but some people might still vote for him. RFK Jr. has no government experience. He only has experience suing the government. Jill Stein is just a flat out kind of idiot. Sorry. And the last time the debt to GDP, we broke the record that we set in World War II. Obviously, when you're fighting a world war, you're going to be spending a ton of money you don't have. And we broke that record now.
Yeah, if you look at the total debt as a percentage of GDP, by that I mean, the debt subject to the debt ceiling when we have a debt ceiling, we've already broken the record. Okay, we've already broken the record, and it's just going up, up, and up. And by the way, stay tuned. There's one more decision that hasn't been made yet with regard to the 2024 presidential election. As you all know, I'm one of the national co-founders of No Labels.
No Labels.
Yeah, I am, and the delegates. I'm chairman of Virginia, and I have a number of other roles. But the delegates voted overwhelmingly that they want to move forward with the ticket. The real question is, can we get a quality ticket?
Yeah, who's in the mix, David Walker, for the No Labels?
Well, I can't mention specific names, but what I will tell you is this: is about 3 months ago, I sent to the head of No Labels, as well as the chairman of the board, as well as other people. I sent them a list of about 30 names, Republicans, Democrats, and unaffiliated, that I felt should be considered, and I sent them a list of criteria that I thought should be used in deciding who we should offer the line to if we move forward. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about the criteria. I'm not going to talk about names. I know some of the people don't want to do it. I know some people don't want to discard their party label. I know some people don't have the courage to do it because
I can tell you what just as a friend, what I can tell you here, for some reason, I'm not really affiliated with No Labels, but I did an event with Forward Party just as a elected official.
Yeah.
I'm a moderate Democrat, and a lot of negative feedback from the progressive Democrats, basically saying these are conservative organizations being infiltrated by Republicans. I was actually asked by a legislator. I gave a $500 check for an event, but because I was just involved with the Forward Party, they returned the check and took my name off as a sponsor. I mean, it's ridiculous. So there's a lot of negative feedback, at least in North Carolina, with a lot of the Democrats about No Labels and Forward Party being conservative-based organizations. So I think we might need to bring you here to North Carolina to speak, David.
Sure, I'll be happy to do it at a mutual convenient time. First, that's a bunch of bunk. Okay.
Okay.
The top people, the top staff in No Labels are Democrats. Okay. Nancy Jacobson is a lifelong Democrat and fundraiser for the Democrats. What they're afraid of is that any additional competition, including No Labels, is going to hurt Biden. And the reason they're worried about that is because Biden's a weak candidate. I can tell you, in all of the analysis that we've done, and we've done much more extensive polling than anybody else, 35,000 people, statistically valid, all 50 states plus DC, Biden loses in every scenario. Now, there's a ways to go before you get to November, right? So we don't all know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen between now and November. But he's a weak candidate. And
David, along those same lines, just really quickly, I had heard, because I got an email today earlier, and actually it was from some of the Democrats, and all along those lines, it might have been some media people, but there is a push, ironically, to get rid of not Biden on the ticket, but to get rid of Kamala, because they feel that she is pulling him down, and all along those lines. So I just wondered, I know it's an economic show, if you had heard that.
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
Speculation about him.
I don't think it's going to happen, but I agree with it. I think you have to expect that there will be commercials that talk about the fact that a vote for Joe Biden is a vote for Kamala Harris for president, given his age and his mental acuity. And I think her popularity is less than his, and she does not have a proven track record of accomplishing much of anything. So Jatovi's had his hand up.
Yeah, Jatovi.
So the issue, Kamala's not coming off the ticket. They are already running those ads that you're talking about Joe Biden's age, and then at the end of it showing Kamala Harris at the end as if your vote is for Kamala Harris. So they're already doing that in terms of pushing that out there. In terms of the issue with the ticket is being a third party or even a fourth party candidate is what's happened in the past, because even if, listing that, okay, well, Joe Biden loses these elections, there's no statistical analysis that shows no labels winning the election. So therefore, the only other winner would be Trump in that way. So based on the history itself, for example, Ross Perot had the biggest name recognition that ran for a third party out of anybody. He got, and also the most money kicking in at the time during the presidency. And he only got he didn't even get 20%. So the struggle that people see,
hold on. First, the most well-known third-party candidate in the 20th century was Teddy Roosevelt, who came in second place under the Bull Moose Party, and the sitting president, William Howard Taft, came in third place.
So we're talking current elections. We're not talking way back in the 70s and stuff like that. Way back then. Well, Ross Perot was more popular than Ralph Nader, who was also more popular than Jill Stein.
Ross Perot was a friend of mine. Okay, when he funded largely the 10 million a minute tour that I did in 2012, wrote a personal check for it. Okay, Ross Perot was ahead in the polls in June of 1992. All right, he dropped out of the race for some somewhat unusual reasons. And the reason that he dropped out of the race was because he didn't want to be president. What he wanted to do was he wanted to wake up America, and he wanted to affect the agenda of the next president and the Congress. His two issues were fiscal responsibility and trade. Okay. And you're correct. He got 19% of the vote. He got no electoral votes, because he came back into the race too late, right? But who knows what would have happened if he had never dropped out. Here's the key. The conditions today are much, much different than they were in 1992. In 1992, you had a sitting president who, at one point after the Gulf War, had a 90% positive rating. 90% positive rating. No president has ever had that before. Secondly, you had a challenger, Bill Clinton, who was dynamic and younger and everything else. You didn't have as many independents. You didn't have people that were as upset about the current state and future direction of the country. You didn't have that. So I will tell you this, Jatovi, without getting into a lot of detail, we have unparalleled polling and analytical data, okay? And if it's Trump versus Biden, Trump wins. If it's Trump versus Biden versus Kennedy, Trump wins. If it's Trump versus Biden versus a quality unity ticket, third party, no labels option, if you will, if it's that, it's a dead heat between Trump and the third party person. And our view is that the third party person can win because of the negatives associated with Trump.
The tough issue with that, going off of that polling, saying the random candidate, the no labels, and the other two, and it's going to be a dead heat. The problem is that, are you saying that only that you're going to be able to galvanize the Democrats that are going to be frustrated with Biden based on no policies? Because at the current moment, there are no policies that people are going to be looking at on the no labels ticket. And then on top of that,
there are. No
every time I've gone to the website, I've seen no policies. I've seen speaking in generalities.
You got to look at the common sense agenda. There are 30 specific issues with illustrative solutions to those 30 issues. Those 30 issues are the result of extensive polling of the entire population. It's on there, you know.
I'll check again, because last time I checked, I did not see any policies dealing with the things that are actually in the news today. Yes, everybody talks about the economy, but again, speaking on the economy, the tough thing for voters to vote on is, hey, I need you to raise my taxes so we can pay for the the exorbitant costs that are there. I need for you to raise the Social Security cap because of the issues that are there. Those are things that voters are voting against. Hence the reason why the Republican Party itself uses, hey, we're cutting your taxes as the basis of everything that they preach on right now. So that's how they galvanize their party.
One party wants to increase spending, the other party wants to cut taxes. The combination of that is why we are where we are today and why it's getting worse. Jacoby, go look at it. It's on there. I've got a copy of it on my
Rick had a question for you, and then I had a question.
Is there anybody in Biden's cabinet? Was there anybody in Trump's cabinet? Is there anybody in the House or the Senate who has your same priorities that you can talk about?
I don't think this is a priority for the Biden administration. I don't think this is a priority for Trump. That's why I'm hoping that we can come up with a quality ticket as a third option. There are people in the House and the Senate who care about the issues I'm talking about. I'll give one example. The chairman of the House Budget Committee is a friend of mine, Jody Arrington, a Republican from Texas. He agrees that we need the commission. By the way, so does the Speaker of the House. He agrees that we need a constitutional amendment, and he's introduced a piece of legislation, House Concurrent Resolution 24, to bring light to the fact that Congress should have already called a convention of states to propose a fiscal responsibility amendment, but it's failed to do so. But I will tell you this: look, politicians want to keep their job. The American people want low taxes and more spending. All right, that's human nature. But on the other hand, my experience has been when you educate them as to what's likely to happen if we don't change course, they change their mind.
Has any country done this? Fixed their deficit?
Yeah.
Italy and Spain had to, because the European Union would not allow them to, and Greece would not allow them to have such a high GDP to debt ratio. The problem with the United States, we're not part of any union that would stop us from going completely out of control. And there's nothing that stops us. But yes, there have been countries that have enforced this.
And let me say, and we don't have any constitutional constraint. Switzerland was starting to head in the wrong direction at the turn of the century, this century. Okay, they ended up adopting via referendum 85% public support the so-called Swiss debt brake, which basically constrains the growth of government based on the growth of the economy and also limits debt to GDP. Look at the result. Switzerland is one of the most successful countries financially and with regard to their currency and with regard to their credit rating of any country on earth.
But did you think Biden did well in the State of the Union, though? He got a lot of positive feedback initially after the State of the Union, did better than people thought he was going to do.
He did better on he did better on a couple of dimensions. One, he stayed awake and had high energy level.
There you go.
But no, he clearly exceeded expectation with regard to his energy level. Okay. But then again, he could have been on uppers. I didn't say that. I don't know that he was, but let me.
You don't know that.
That's the conspiracy that's out there. Yeah, that's what the Republican Party talking point right now.
Well, I'm not a Republican. So, but let me just say this. He did yell a lot. He was angry. That came across.
Yeah.
But with regard to the three issues that the American people care the most about, how are we going to deal with increasing economic growth? How are we going to deal with inflation? What are we going to do to put our finances in order? That's number one. Number two, how are we going to secure the border, which in many places, that's number one. And number three, what are we going to do about the fact that we seem to have declining diplomatic influence and people don't seem to fear us militarily anymore.
Hey, David, just
We
really
roll
quickly,
for three.
just really quickly, because you kind of alluded to it in that answer and everything, but I'm just curious, and it comes back to what Jacoby asked, and I have glanced at it, but I've not read it the way that Jacoby said he had, and I will go back and look at it. But where does No Label stand is on the positions around the homeless? Because there are a number of people that are frustrated with their housing, frustrated with the fact that they're either paying exorbitant rates or are not able to afford a house in general. And where does No Label stand on the border issues? Because those are the two issues I hear a lot of people talking about. And I was just wondering if there are specific things that you can point to that are programs that y'all have in mind for those issues.
Well, with regard to the border, number one priority is secure the border, which in many cases means go back to some of the policies that we had before. The truth is that catch and release is illegal. The current policy of catch and release is inconsistent with current law. In addition, even the Department of Homeland Security will tell you that 85 to 90% of the people that we're doing catch and release on are not eligible for asylum. They're not eligible. So we shouldn't be releasing them when we know up front that they're not eligible for asylum. We do need, and No Label supports immigration reform that gives a pathway to citizenship to the dreamers, that determine that
I just wrote an article wrote an article on that today in the paper. So
yeah. I mean, we do believe there needs to be immigration reform, but we also believe that you need to separate between a pathway to legal status from a pathway to citizenship, from temporary work permits, from long-term things. Look, there are ways to solve this problem, but you're not going to solve it unless you've got a leader who's elected by all the people, and there's only one person that does that, that's in that category, and that's the president, who pushes and can bring people together.
But
and
again,
on homelessness, look, I mean, we need a solvent, sustainable, secure social safety net for those that are truly in need. I think it's absolutely outrageous that we're spending huge sums of money to shelter, to feed, to provide health care to people who are illegal when we've got Americans who are legal, whether they're former veterans or not, that we don't do the same for. So, I mean, I think that's just outrageous.
Just on a quick thing. And this is one of those things, I guess, that, and me being part of that younger generation, that always gets me a little, my hackles spike up a little bit.
We lost you.
Oh, sorry. You're pitting two individuals in bad predicaments against each other, where you're saying that we can't spend on the homeless if we're spending on immigration, and we can't spend on immigration if we don't fix the homeless. We can do both. It is there, and the money is there. And then in terms of immigration in itself, it is. We find it now, David. We are able to find money for getting bombs, blowing people up, and doing wars. But for some odd reason, when we need to fix the homeless or do education, we can't seem to find the money. So the money is there. And the thing is, in terms of immigration,
illegal is illegal, Jacoby.
David, let me get to that. In terms of immigration, when we're talking about the catch and release program, a lot of that is due to the fact that we have not spent the money to actually allow individuals to be processed so they can be what you're looking for, that legal. And we tend to fight against that. For example, this $14 billion bill, or the $14 billion that was going to the border to help out, which the Republican Party voted against. And we cannot place the blame on Biden because he actually was ready to sign that, but we can place that on the Republican Party, who actually voted against it due to the fact that Trump said he did not want that. He wanted an actual issue to fight on, to do politics about. So we had $14 billion on the table to actually add more individuals to process people, because as well as I do, that there is a backlog of individuals going back 5 to 10 years of people trying to get in legally. And at some point, those individuals end up having to either cross the border and even more so, those individuals who actually are more so considered legal than anybody are the ones who end up overstaying their visas because those visas can't be processed in time. So a lot of the quote unquote illegals are that.
I've heard enough. All right. First, understand this. I'm a lot closer to ground zero than you are. I'm a lot.
No, because I've got a personal family member going through the immigration process at this very.
Jacoby, quit filibustering. All right. I'm a lot closer to ground zero than you are. I know what the political situation is. You don't.
Oh, okay? I'm back. Secondly,
you're going to get nothing with regard to this issue until the border's secure. The president I'm telling you, the president has the ability today to take.
No, he does not, because again, Trump tried that and that got caught up in the courts. No. So you can't say he has the ability when it gets caught up in the courts.
I can because I know he does. By the way, last thing I'll say on this, because it's gotten ridiculous, is there is a bipartisan bill in the House proposed by the Problem Solvers Caucus that provides border security, that provides about $49 billion in funding for to help with the process, but security first. And then you're right, we need more judges and all of that. Yeah, I agree with that. And also provide some funding for Ukraine, for Israel, and for Taiwan. It's targeted. It's more focused. It's more realistic. And it's a lot less money, but it's still debt financed. And so we ultimately got to come back to what we said about before. We're spending money we don't have. We got to figure out how we're going to quit doing that. Yeah.
Hey, Dave, and we're going to have to deal with that next week because we're out of time, but we do want to thank the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, and our panel from around the world with economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. And we will see you all next week. Take care. Bye-bye.